This is my friend. She is a mix of a Rhode Island Red and a Leghorn, so she's a production red chicken. She lays big, beautiful eggs that I like to use to cook bread. Say hello. Welcome to Simple Man's Barbecue. I'm Lauren, and today we're cooking ciabatta bread.
A Simple Man's Barbecue.
So I bake from a book by Peter Reinhart. It's called Artisan Breads Every And the dough or the breads that you make from this book are all using artisan flour, so they're very fluffy and light. And this dough is a little finicky to create because it takes a lot of prep time, but the actual baking time is very minimal. So the first thing that you do is you look at how much bread flour you need in ounces. So I use a scale instead of using the cup measurements. So you scale out the bowl, and then I need 40 ounces of flour. And the reason that I use the ounces instead of cups is because I used to use cups and it messed up quite a bit, so I found that this is more precise. All right, second thing we need is coarse salt. We need 5 teaspoons, 2.5 teaspoons of yeast, then 4 cups of water. So this is where it gets a little messy. You can stir it with your hands, or you can use one of these little bread spatulas. You can also use a stand mixer, but I don't own one, so I use this thing. And so the first thing you want to do is just stir for 1 minute to get this to kind of go together, because right now it's like a soupy, floury mess. We're trying to get it to turn into a dough. Dough is one of the more messy doughs to work with. Some of the breads that are in this book that I've made, they're a little easier, but this one's just very gooey. So it takes a little work. And it should look like this. It'll be kind of shaggy, a little sticky. It's been a minute. So also another thing is try to really scoop underneath, because you'll get a lot of flour that settles to the bottom, and you want to get as much as you can to stick to the dough. So then you let the dough rest for 5 minutes to hydrate the flour with the water. The next thing we're going to do is add a couple tablespoons of olive oil to the dough and mix for another minute. And this dough, after adding oil, should be a little less shaggy. So if it's not, I would add a little more. You can actually do this by hand to get it worked in better. And it should be starting to form a solid piece, which it is. It'll need a little time to sit, but this is looking good. The next thing we're gonna do is put olive oil into a clean bowl and smear it around the sides. And you'll take the dough, it should be pretty oily at this point. Set it in this bowl, and you can use plastic wrap or tin foil or just a towel, and you'll cover the top and let it sit for 10 minutes. Now that the dough has rested for 10 minutes, we're gonna take it out and start the folding process. So I like to use this Silpat. You can get the generic brand as well, but basically the way that the mat is designed is that it won't stick to the dough, so it makes it easier to work with. So put a little olive oil on it and transfer the dough with the scraper. And then you're gonna have to get it to be a longer piece. So I don't know if this is what you're supposed to do, but I just shake it a little bit until it's long. And this is really hearty dough, so you don't have to worry about ripping it at this point. Okay, so to stretch and fold, you have it laid out long like this, and it's just how it sounds. You fold it, turn it, stretch it out again. And you can use your fingers to stretch it as well. Fold, turn, and you'll do that 4 times. And the more you fold it, the harder it gets to stretch, so that's fun. All right, third fold, turn, and now stretch. All right, once you do the final fold, you'll flip it over and just form it into a ball. Kind of using the bottom hand to tighten the loaf a little bit, tighten it up. And then you'll set it back into your bowl, cover for 10 minutes, and then you repeat that process 3 more times, so 4 times total. All right, so now that we have stretch and folded the dough 3 times, we're gonna do the final stretch and fold before we put it into a large bowl to let it sit overnight. So do the same thing. Get the dough out with the spatula. And at this point, it should be formed into a dough ball. All right, so we'll stretch the first fold, turn it, stretch again, fold, turn a 3rd time, stretch, fold, and the final stretch and fold. And it gets harder to stretch. The more times you do it, the tighter the dough gets, so it gets a little difficult to work with. All right, do the final fold, and then similar to what we did before, we'll turn it over so that the seam is down, and just form it into a tight ball. And then I was using this bowl to let it sit, but this bowl is not quite big enough because this dough will actually double to triple in size overnight. So I use a very large bowl, dump some olive oil in, work it around the sides so that when the dough grows overnight up the sides of the bowl, it won't stick. And you'll just make sure that's tight. Set it in. Final olive oil over top. After you put the olive oil in, you'll cover this with saran wrap or tin foil and let it sit in the fridge overnight. This type of dough has to sit overnight to let the yeast and the dough work together and build up. So when we look at this tomorrow morning, it should be about double in size, if not bigger. And tomorrow we will take the dough out, do the prep to get it ready to bake. Today we're gonna be finishing the focaccia. So what we're gonna do is take the dough out of the bowl, cut it in half, and begin prepping it in the pan. So we're gonna take the dough. Since I made a double batch, we're gonna have to cut this in half. So we'll scrape it out onto the counter. And we'll use this metal scraper to cut it in half. And if you have bubbles in your dough, you wanna try to avoid cutting into those. So like this is a bubble. Up here is one. I don't see a lot of them in the middle, so we should be okay. So cut this in half. And then to pick it up, you want to make sure your make sure your hands are oiled so that it doesn't stick. And we'll put a little on here. Lift it, do it this way. And now we're going to just push it with our fingers to get it to stretch on its own. And at some point, it will stop stretching. Let's see how much we can get. And again, with these bubbles, you want to try not to pop them if possible. If there's a lot of them, you'll lose a few, but the gas bubbles are what gives it the light, fluffy texture. So when you're creating focaccia, you have to push it in stages to get it to fit the pan. It won't fit the pan right away, but you want to push on it until it starts to retract right away. So the way that you know this is as good as it's going to get for now is when you push and the dough pulls back, just like that. So at this point, we'll have to let it sit in the slightly warm oven for 5 minutes, and then we'll take it out and continue this process to fill the pan with the dough. We just pulled the pan out of the oven that has the dough in it, and now we'll let it sit for 10 minutes and have a drink.
All right.
Now that the dough has had about 10 minutes to rest, we'll do another set of pushing on it. I'm actually going to rotate it because it's a little longer this way. So you should only have to do this 2 to 3 times to get it to cover the pan. This one might take 3. So the dough is starting to pull back, which means it's probably not going to stretch anymore at this point. So we'll put it back in the warm oven and let it rest for another 5 minutes. So now that the dough has rested another 10 minutes, we should have to do just one final push to get it to fill the rest of the pan. And at this point, if it doesn't touch the edges, it's okay. It should fill out as it starts to bake. So if it doesn't get all the way, that's fine. I think that's close enough. So now I'm going to add cheese, Parmesan cheese. And you can add any mix of seasonings, cheese. Sometimes I like to put pepperoni on top. It just depends what you like and the people that you are cooking for like. So now that we have the toppings on the focaccia, we will heat the oven to 500 degrees, and the oven has to sit at 500 degrees for about 45 minutes before we can begin the baking process to give the oven time to heat up as much as possible. Now that the oven's been on at 500 degrees for 45 minutes, we're gonna put the focaccia in at 450 degrees. And we'll leave it in for 12 minutes before we rotate it and cook it another 15 minutes. Now that it's been 12 minutes, we'll rotate the pan. And leave it in for another 10 minutes. At this point, the focaccia's done. It's been about 22 minutes, so you'll want to let it sit for a while until it's had time to cool, and then you can cut into it.
A simple man's barbecue!
Now that it's been, oh shit, that's tall. I gotta do that over. Holy shit. Welcome back to Simple Man's Barbecue. I'm Lauren. I don't have my chicken today, and fuck you, Robert Wade.